I am so excited to introduce everyone to Karen Valencic today. We are going to learn about mastering conflict from her black belt perspective and gain momentum. I feel like Karen and I both use this word momentum a lot. So excited to have you on.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be here, Lindsay. So,
Oh, I'm
yeah.
just going to shush
Yeah.
and let you talk, girl. Like, you got to tell us where you're from, where your background started, all of the good stuff.
Okay. Well, sure. I am from Indianapolis, Indiana. So I'm in the center of the country. And we're known for our fast cars here. And so cars are a big thing here. But my background actually is I'm a mechanical engineer and I used to work in the auto industry. And that was a phenomenal experience for me. And I was actually one of the very first women at the division in engineering that I worked for. So
Oh,
I really was, I'm not going to say I was a pioneer because there were many women who paved the way to make that an easy entry point for me. And I will forever be grateful for them. And when I did that work, I loved what I did, but I really didn't get a lot of education around how do you communicate in a way that really brings people together. And I often found myself kind of in a push-pull with my colleagues. And I don't mean to make it sound like it was an awful thing, because it certainly was not. But it's how do you, when you have differences, how do you engage in order to get your voice heard? I also found during that time, my last job, I was a product engineer in a high volume production plant. And so I had to make decisions in an instant, and I could shut the whole place down, which costs thousands and thousands of dollars a minute. And so there's a lot of responsibility with all of that. And I loved what I did. I loved what I did back then, but I left that work when my first daughter was born. And my husband at the time was in dentistry. And we used to go to these dental conferences out in the Rockies that were really not a lot about dentistry, but more about more about personal growth and practice management type of things. And I was in this session. It was called The Magic of Conflict, and Tom Crum was the facilitator. And it had such a gigantic impact on my life in that moment that I thought, I'm a pretty good engineer, but this is going to be my next career, because I think the world needs more people to be able to deal with conflict in a way that elevates and engages than anything I was going to invent in my engineering world. So at that time, it's interesting because I had zero support from anyone close to me. Which was just kind of eye-opening. Everyone was like, you're going to do what? And so I felt very, very gifted in my life in terms of, I just had clarity of purpose around this whole thing. And that was a long time ago. I even hate to say how long ago it was. So, but it was a long time ago, before, in the 90s, let's say that.
okay. Yeah, it dates us.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I did Tom's work for a long time, and then over the years, I just evolved it. But Lindsay, I know your podcast has a focus on health, and I kind of want to bring my work back to what your main thrust is, which is around health. And particularly now with, we're going through such culture change right now, and it's really hard to predict what the next thing's going to be that's going to disrupt us. And I find, from a health standpoint, being able to really, what I want to call, master the way we engage, whether it's with another person, whether it's an event, or whether it's a thing. I think that knowing how you can be powerful in those situations rather than weak. And when I say power, that's something I open my book up with, is I think people really misunderstand power. And in my teaching, that's one of the places where I began, which is people confuse force with power. And I like to use the analogy of, Nike will tell you to just do it. And just do it is based upon force. It's linear, and it peters out really fast, where power is rotational. And power, and another example of that is if I'm going to put boards together, I could use a hammer and a nail, which is force, and think about how you have to keep hitting that with a lot of force. And if you miss your mark a little bit, you screw up your fingers, and you can hit it off the wrong way, and it's not very efficient, really. But it really correlates to how a lot of us keep doing things, which is we keep pounding away, and it's not very healthy. So now if you contrast that with a screw and a screwdriver, you got to have a little force to get that screw started. And then as you rotate the screw, it's easier and it's more stable. And the biggest beauty about that is anyone that has a wooden deck knows this to be true. If it were put together with nails, you get loose boards after time. You get temperature change, moisture, vibration, and your nails, that straight line, loses its holding power. But a screw, because it's got more surface area contact, it'll keep its holding power better. And so I always start my sessions with saying, so doesn't it make sense to pattern our behavior and our communication after a spiral rather than a straight line? And so
Chills.
that's
This is
where,
so great.
yeah, and that's where my company name, which is Spiral Impact, came from. And it's fascinating because in a world right now where we have a lot of different opinions about, let's just say, the vaccine and the whole virus thing, and I don't need to take a side on either of those, because both sides kind of do the same thing, which is I have people will say, I'm not going to even talk to them because they will not change their mind. And I always chuckle a little bit, because if you enter into a conversation with that mindset, you are the same as they are. And a lot of times people don't get that, is the fact that, yeah, you're going to go into this conversation wanting to change their mind, but you're choosing not to because they won't change theirs. So if we really want to come together, it's not that difficult, really. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's easy. It requires, but what I love about the work I do is it's so physical. And when you demonstrate this stuff physically, it just becomes more apparent what we do and how it doesn't work or not. So, yeah.
I feel like we're going to need you to go into exactly the work that you currently do, and then we can tie it in nutrition and fitness wise, but just, yeah.
Well, sure. A lot of my work, actually right now, I'm tending to do more speaking. So it's more shorter programs, and then doing some smaller coaching. But for example, I had a couple executives that were in the same company, and they were really just not connecting. They were just not connecting. And so what I taught them, and there's, in my model, there's 5 very simple, straightforward things it's 30,000 feet. But if you apply even one of them, it starts to shift things, because what we tend to do is go head to head. Even if we're not yelling at each other, it might be all internally expressed. And that's the thing that I think we need to think about is am I pushing inside myself? Am I causing myself stress over something that I haven't spoken? And a lot of my bread and butter over the last 25 years actually has been in healthcare. And it's interesting, I would work with teams across departments or internal teams, but a lot of times people get so busy in their work that they have, in healthcare, they may have great relationships with their patients, but internally with their team, not necessarily so much. And so what I would do in those circumstances is I would go in, and I call it professional development, team development, and I would teach them about what conflict is. And when I say master conflict, I should say that doesn't mean you've got it perfect. It means that and I love the quote that the true master tries and fails and tries and fails again. And so that's what mastery is. It's not that every time I have a conflict, I get it perfect and there's a beautiful resolution I can tie a bow on, but it's the fact that I'm willing to enter in and look at myself and experiment with different ways. So so what I would do is teach people about conflict. And because of the visual and kinesthetic nature of what I teach, people really get that. They really get that. And then I can easily go from there to having them dialogue about what do they see in the future? What is it they'd like to create as a team? And that dialogue there's such healing that happens in that, because again, we're not going head to head on positions. We're actually having a conversation about the future. And it's such exciting work. It's such exciting work. I mean, I remember a few years ago, I did a session that was between the hospice department and the palliative care department. And they asked me to come in, and they were at a point where they every time they met, people would break down in tears because they were so frustrated with each other. But yet I was able to come in and facilitate something where I'm educating them again about what is conflict and how do you become successful at mastering it. And so they get some skills, and then we can kind of create some agreements and what I call an intentional statement around that. So that's the nature of what I do. So what I do is I do some one-on-one coaching. I sometimes do small group or 2-on-2 coaching. I speak to large audiences or small audiences for like keynotes and stuff. And then I've also got an online platform. And so if this is intriguing to you, I actually created a set of videos that show these principles physically worked out. And so I think there's 6 10-minute videos, and I have the key concepts there. And I have a live blog, so people will ask me questions, and there's actually an exchange that happens with that. And I'm soon to add into that a bi-weekly or every other week live video Zoom thing with that for answering questions. So those are the types of things that I do. So yeah.
No, that was so beautifully stated, and my brain is going all over the place with this, because one of the areas that I see this work sliding in on nutrition and fitness is that people don't always give credit to. When we are not in a good brain place, it is really hard to carry through with trying to build new habits, maintain habits. I'm even picturing your work scenario where you have these two departments that are passionate about what they're doing and they should be on the same page, and they're frustrated all day. So like to walk out of that frustration and try to have ease, whether that's at work or outside of work, that's really difficult.
Right. And it shouldn't be that thing that you go home and light a candle, and get rid of it all. It's
Yeah.
got to be all day long, and
Yes.
part part of
That's
my
awesome.
model, part of my model is I've got 5 key points, and this fits it. I'll share with you how this fits in. So the
Yeah.
first point is to recognize when you have conflict, and if your audience members, if you can see me, just take 2 hands and push them together, 2 fists, and that's conflict. Conflict by definition is to strike together. And it only takes one person to do this. And so a lot of times people will say, oh, I know someone that needs to take your class. And it's like, one person can make a change. And so there's a difference between destructive conflict and what I call innovative conflict. And innovative conflict, they both strike, but innovative conflict knows just how much to strike before it starts moving. And so if you can see my hands, I'm spiraling. And that's where, one person, and you could do this with another person, which is what I do in workshops, is have 2 people get together, get that push, and then just one person opens their hands and moves in, and it totally shifts. So you have momentum, Lindsay, momentum. Yeah. That's what it's all about. And but that model is first recognizing when you're pushing. And then there's 4 quadrants, if you can imagine that. And I always call it, again, you can look at any 4 of these quadrants and get movement. But one of them is knowledge, which is around asking questions and discovery and that type of thing, and knowing yourself. I use DISC personality assessments a lot in my work. There's also, so that's one of them. Another one is intention. And then another one's support. And then the other one that makes me think of you is I call focused energy. And I teach things in the martial arts. We talk about centering, and it's become, mindfulness has become a buzzword almost, and emotional intelligence, and those kind of all fit into the same place. And that's a key part of my thing. But the other part of it is, what are you putting in your body? Because I
Yeah.
believe, and actually I took a online course with a guy, and I don't know that I would recommend it, but, and so I'm not going to mention his name, but but one thing he did say, he said, he believed that if people ate correctly, there would be no conflict in the world. And honestly, I think there's something to that, because I think when you stuff yourself with a lot of fast food, and for me, it's a lot of carbohydrates. I don't do well with a lot of carbohydrates. And so, and when I don't feel good because of what I've eaten, I don't respond well. I'm
Right.
not totally present. My brain gets foggy, all those things. And so that aspect of health, I think, is really important. And it's different for everyone. I mean, I think there's some basic principles, but I think it's true. I think it's true for everyone. And a lot of times we can, again, if we take care of ourselves, and I'll say to you and your listeners, I found myself during this shutdown drinking too much wine, and I stopped. I'm not going to say I've quit drinking forever, but I've cut that out, because I thought, I don't feel great when I drink. And when you're by yourself, and I live by myself and work by myself, so it's like, this is not a good thing. So I stopped, actually. And I'll give a plug for a book called, it's called This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. And it's a fabulous book. And I've read it 3 times now. And my daughter read it, and she quit drinking. Her dad and stepmom, they read it, they quit drinking. So it's a very powerful book. And I feel really grateful for her about that. So I think the health part is much larger than people give voice to it. So I think,
Yes.
and I think that quote where he said, if everybody would eat well, eat right, there would be no conflict. Now, I don't tend to agree with that, but I think we could handle the conflict better, is,
Yeah.
so that's that piece. So,
Well, what's
yeah.
interesting, we'd say conflict, and I always think with somebody else. And then while you're talking more food, I picture more with self,
Yes.
as you're mentioning wine for you. And
Mm.
me too, Eileen. That's something that I'm always forever like, it's so fun to have a glass of wine and cook dinner. And
I know.
there's that slippery slope of what's okay and what is fogging. Yeah, what's not helping. And
Yeah.
then for other people, it's when we walk away from a dinner party and go, I didn't want to eat like that, and now I'm frustrated and annoyed. You can
Mhm.
just see these emotions of frustration because of inner conflict and
Right.
disappointment in ourselves.
Right. And I think about dinners. And one of the things I notice when I go out to dinner and I'm not drinking, I tend to be a little bit more in charge of what I'm eating,
Yeah.
and that's another benefit, which is I'm not, I can leave. And I went to a dinner party on Saturday night, and it was fun because there was only one person there that was still drinking. And this is a group of people that we used to get together and drink, 5 bottles of wine. And it's like,
Yeah.
and we're drinking water and sparkling water. But I'm aware I leave there. I'm not concerned about driving, and I'm not waking up in the middle of the night, and I feel good. And
Yeah.
so but if anyone is serious about it, I highly recommend that book, that by
Yeah.
Annie Grace. And what I like about it is, um, she doesn't make you the problem like maybe AA does. She brings out the fact that alcohol is ethanol, and it's poison. And it's highly addictive, and it's as toxic as heroin and cocaine. And when you think about that, I don't think it would never get legalized today. If it were
Sure.
illegal. So, and then, it's a society norm. That's what makes it so difficult. And I think the pandemic, there are so many memes around, I'm going from coffee to wine. And there were so many places that kind of subtly give you permission. And the thing is, I think I like in her book, she said she had to quit eating eggs. And she said, nobody says when she can't eat eggs, well, what's your problem? Do you have a problem? But if you say, I'm not going to drink wine, they say, oh, do you have a problem?
Yeah.
It's like, so I think that's pretty interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but how we take care of ourselves is truly and truly important. So yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes. No, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's interesting. I actually have a couple guests in the queue for podcast interviews that have their whole membership around taking alcohol out of their life, and
Uh-huh.
how perfectionism brought them to alcohol and how alcohol affected them. So I love, you're kind of like laying some groundwork here, and then
Mhm.
we're going to get some follow up with this, which will
Yeah,
probably be appropriate through the holiday season and into the new year.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
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 So
So,
I want to know, how did martial arts play a big role in your life? And it
well,
even it sneaks into your books, I believe. So
oh, and
fill us in.
actually, it's more than sneaks into my book. My practice is Aikido, which is many people have never heard of Aikido, and it's spelled Aikido. And I read about it in a book. I read about it several places, many, 40 years ago. I read a story. It was called A Kind Word Turneth Away Wrath, which was about an Aikido person in Japan. But let me just tell you, and actually in your show notes, I can send you a link to that story. It's
Perfect.
a
Yeah.
great story. But it really piqued my interest around Aikido. But of course, there was no Aikido here in the Midwest back 40 years ago. Then when I was at that dental conference, well, Tom Crum is an Aikidoist, and his work is grounded in Aikido. So it was like, oh, here this comes again. And so when I came back, there was Aikido in Indianapolis. And I should say to your listeners too, that there's a lot of different styles of Aikido. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, I've got some samples on my resource page on my website that are what I think is beautiful Aikido. Steven Seagal is probably known, the most famous character that does Aikido. Personally, I don't feel like I like how he reflects on the art, but that's my understanding of the intent of it. And so, but the good thing about him is he has brought a lot of, he's brought more popular content to it. The Walking Dead also had several episodes a few years ago with Aikido in it. And we had a lot of influx of people to the dojo at that point in time. But let me tell you a little bit of history.
Yeah.
I yeah, Aikido evolved back in the mid 1900s in Japan by a man named Morihei Ueshiba. And we call him O Sensei, which means great teacher. And he was really a master at a lot of different types of art and Japanese sword. But midlife, he got to a point where he realized that what he was teaching and practicing was really in conflict with his values and his intention, because he was very much a community and family man. But the martial arts that he was teaching were all about destruction, hurting people, killing people. And he midlife went on a sabbatical, and his quest was to try to find the true martial art. And there's a lot of things written about experiences he had, but what's important is he came back and he said, I have found the true martial art, and it is love. And so he went back to the dojo and he started practicing with a different intention. And that is an important word right there, because that's one of the 5 things: intention. So his intention came to be to nurture his attacker's life as well as his own. So it came to be called Aikido because AI is harmony or blending. KI is energy, universal energy. Do is the way of life. And so it's the way of life through harmonizing. And that's, it came to be called that. It's not like he came out of the mountains with a PowerPoint presentation and says, I've developed this, but that's now, and you've probably heard of there's different things that sound like Aikido, but they're not. Aikido is very specific, and it's not a beat 'em up type thing. And that's, I think, the reason a lot of people, you don't hear about it a lot, because it's not fast to learn it. It's not about force, it's about position. And it takes a real commitment to learn it and practice it and get proficient at it, because it's really, really reworking how you engage. And so what I've done with my model of spiral impact is taken some basic things that people can practice in their everyday life and be able to apply those concepts without having to take high falls on a mat in the dojo. So it's a lot, it's just a lot of fun. And what I find is when you can, a picture paints a million words, they say, but when you can actually demonstrate something and people can see it and they can feel it, they really get it. And I remember, Lindsay, in one of my first corporate clients many, many, many years ago was a technology company, and it was mostly men. And there was one guy in the back of the room, and he crossed his hands over his chest and he leaned back, and he was the antagonist for the entire day. And he was just, and I just worked with it. But, in the evaluations, the smile sheets, he says, this was the biggest waste of time and money I've ever seen. And which kind of hurt my feelings a little bit. I was still young back then. But it was interesting. Several weeks later, I was talking to one of the principals, and he was not in that session. And I asked him, I said, what are you seeing? He says, well, I'll tell you what. He says, I've seen a radical change in one person in particular. And I said, well, who was that? Well, it was JD. And so a person doesn't have to admit that they get it, but you can't avoid, when you see it and you feel it, you can't unsee it. So, yeah. And so so anyway, so I find I sow seeds, and that's one thing, Lindsay, I appreciate being on here, because I think the world needs more people that are willing to blend and harmonize rather than beat each other up. So I'm kind of on a mission. I always have been. It just seems like it's more and more important every day. So, yeah.
I completely agree. And I also think it's so hopeful for me to continue to get exposed to. I'm going, you and I really resonate. Oh, you and I really, it starts to feel like there's more people out in the world shouting out good things, loving things, but it's just not what we're always privy to seeing.
No. And unfortunately, the news just kind of highlights those really negative conflicts in a way. So, but yeah. So,
well, and it's also like, this isn't as exciting because we're getting along. We're not,
right.
So our poor journey here, our passion is slow and steady. So it's never going to be a trending YouTube it's good information that needs to exist. And so,
well, yeah. And, all stories and movies have to have a protagonist and an antagonist and all that stuff. And it's kind of like at this point, and actually I put out on LinkedIn yesterday, I'm always looking for things that I can watch that don't scare me. I mean, we're recording this in October. I don't know when you'll publish it, but it's like, I don't want to see violence. I don't want to see dysfunction. I just want to be entertained in a way that's nice. And I recently started watching a series on Prime, Amazon Prime, and it's called Modern Love. And it's nothing like I would have thought if I was just scrolling through it, but a friend of mine told me about it. And what I love about it, they're essays that were contributed to the New York Magazine. So they're basically true stories of different types of modern love. And there's not much violence. There's not a whole lot of fighting. It's just there is some conflict, and of course it gets resolved, but it's not in your face and dramatic. Nobody's getting shot. There's no, it's just really pleasant to see where people evolve in those love relationships. And so anyway, I've been really enjoying that. And because I do find that what I watch, and some people say it doesn't matter, but I get affected by what I watch. And again, when you talk about health, consumption doesn't have to be what you're eating and drinking. It's also what are you reading and watching, because that too is consumption that affects you. So Yeah.
Right. We have to protect our eyes and our ears.
Mhm.
And I think that people can hear that and go, yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Right.
to really implement, like put the positive people in your ears, stop watching the show that you walk away from, like you said, either scared or I feel like you can like lose hope in humanity through some shows. And it
Right.
just, I had a client one time say that we need to curate what comes in through eyes
Mhm.
and ears. And if we all took the time to do our social media, if I
Mhm.
had a running roll of just podcast guests, those are the only people coming up in my social media. Do you know how
Nice.
much more motivating that is than the people going back and forth, fighting politics,
Yeah.
COVID, all of that? It's just like we need
Yeah.
to delete what's not helpful
Right.
and really make effort to put in the helpful because it doesn't just fall into our lap
Well,
naturally.
exactly. And that works both sides on social media too. And I have found that I have some people I'm just going to admit this because I'm not perfect, but I find sometimes when people are only positive and, oh, look at me, look at me, look at me, I find that that brings up stuff for me too that doesn't necessarily make me feel good. It's like, well, I'm not doing all of that. And what, it's my life. Does my life suck? Thought I was happy. No.
Yeah, until I saw your life.
Yeah, and then I see your life, and it's like on some level that's kind of motivating, but it also, I think it's so fascinating what came out recently with Facebook and those algorithms. And I think you do have to watch what it is that you consume and recognize not everything's always truth out there. And how
Right.
do you discern what is truth and what is not? So yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that's why we need books on our shelves like yours. I feel like I haven't even said the title of your book yet,
Oh,
but let's make sure. Okay. The Black Belt Edition, Spiral Impact, The Power to Get It Done with Grace, which I love your title.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. I told you I'm going to be starting a podcast, and I've been toying around. Many years ago, I had a marketing person that told me that if I was trying to market conflict, that he says, you're trying to market something everybody wants to avoid.
Yeah.
And I really struggled with that for a lot of years. And actually, even the title of my book, my first edition was published in 2007. And the Black Belt edition of this book, which is 40% different than the first one. So if anyone's
Hmm.
out looking at it, the Black Belt is a black cover and it's got about 40% new information in it. I published that. It came out on March 17th last year, 2020. And on the day everything shut down here, and I got bestseller on Amazon, which I'm very proud of. But um, oh, I forgot where I was going with this. I forgot where I was going. What was I leading to? Oh,
Hmm.
oh,
We were talking about, oh no, we'll move on for a second because it'll
okay.
come
We'll
right
move
back.
on for a second. It'll come back. But
It will.
yeah.
Oh, your podcast, doing it. Were you
Oh
about
yeah.
to tell us a
But it's that whole thing of what when I look at over my career, who has paid me the most money for work? It's people that are in major conflict that need help.
Mhm.
But what might people be more attracted to is power with grace in the
Yeah, yeah.
workplace. And so it's kind of like, what do you market to? What do you market to? What do people want? But I do know that people that have conflict will do anything to get out of it.
Right.
And so they're yeah. I mean, I remember, gosh, this has been a while back, but I got a call. And it was in an OR area, and there were two groups of people that were having a lot of conflict. And they said, do you think you could help these people? And I said, absolutely. And they said, okay, well, on Good Friday, which was Friday at 3 o'clock, we've got about a half an hour.
Oh my goodness. You're like, might take a little more time than that. Just a little
Of
bit.
course I said yes. Of course I said yes. And it actually ended up being a year-long project, which we worked with, helping them see, working through their conflict. Also, because I'm an engineer, I was able to help do a lot of process stuff in that as well. But, this kind of brings me to a different one of those 5 quadrants. or that 4 quadrants, and that is intention. And so I was like, what am I going to do and with a group that's hostile with each other in 30 minutes? What am I going to do with that? And so I didn't do any martial arts with them really, but what I did say to them is I asked them if they had ever ridden a bike up a hill. And everyone raised their hand. Yes, yes, I have. And then I said, have you ever noticed how much easier it is to ride a bike up a hill when you look at the top of the hill than if you look at your pedals? And most people, some people know that, but most people are like, yeah, but experiment next time you're riding a bicycle up a hill. And that's really about intention, which is focusing on where you want to be.
Mhm.
And so then I moved them into a conversation around what's at the top of their hill. And that's where, we ended up having a really good dialogue that set the stage for the rest of the time we spent, all those weeks we spent together, of how are we going to get to the top of the hill. And but the pedals are the conflicts. It's that you did this again, you're not listening to me, what happened to this? It's all that stuff that we get caught into. But intention is such an important thing. And in my book I talk about 3 levels of intention, but really thinking through, even when I have, I'm having some kind of casual conversation, I think through, what is my intent? Before I write an email, I think through, what is my intent? And I coach people to think about what's your intent without it being conditional on another person's behavior. What is it that you want? And I'll give you another example. I was working with a group recently where they have an inside and outside sales team. And one of the women said, well, how do I apply this to my external salespeople? Because they're really making life hard for me. And I asked her what her intent was. And she said, I want them to know how frustrated I am. And I said to her, I said, I get that. Yet that's not really your intent. That's not conditional on their response, them doing something. So what is think about it. If this is all working well, what is it that you've got? And then she said, I want to provide really great customer service. And I said, now, if you approach this conversation starting there, that's what gets you movement. But if you start it with, I feel really frustrated about what you guys are doing over there. That's something. And actually, my first Newsweek article that I wrote, I used that as an example. As I heard a couple people having this conversation where I could tell they had taken some conflict course that was telling them they need to talk about their feelings.
Yeah.
That's a really bad place to start. That goes bad really fast. If you think about your intent, that is a great place to start. Your intent that's not conditional on some other person. So, my intent is I want to get to work on time. That could be a conversation, back when my kids were teenagers. Of course, curfew was an issue. And when I had the hammer out and I kept saying, you got to be home by midnight, that created issues because, again, my intent was about their behavior. When I shifted the intent to what I wanted, which was, I really want to make sure that I get a good night's sleep because I don't feel well the next day if I don't. And what I'd really like to know is if I wake up, I'd love to know where you are. And that changed the conversation. It changed the conversation because now it was no longer about them doing, me making them wrong and having this hard line they've got to follow. Now it becomes about me. And they can't argue with that. No, Mom, I want you to be not getting a good night's sleep. They're not going to say that.
Right. You put them in a spot of like, oh, huh.
Yeah, exactly. So, so intention is really a huge thing. And I talk about big picture, deeper personal intention and intention in the moment, what's happening now. And I always like to share with my audiences, if I feel like they're with me, which is most of the time, I always like to share my own experience because I have a really fabulous relationship with my former husband and his wife, and who I share my children with. And honestly, through this pandemic, they're the ones that had my back more than anybody else. And I really value greatly our friendship and our relationship. And people are always surprised by that.
Yeah.
And I always say, well, it gets down to intent. And my intention when we got divorced was I wanted to have a great relationship with them. That was conscious on my part. And then my deeper personal intent is to honor myself and honor others always. That's what I carry with me. And so, and the part of it about that that's new as I started doing this work is to honor myself, because
Mhm.
I got in trouble. The reason my marriage didn't work was because I wasn't honoring myself. I was out of balance with serving other people. And I think that's probably a feminine trait in our culture, but or in probably most cultures. But I think that it was really having that intention, because then in the middle, that immediate intent, it always allowed me to weigh what's really important to talk about here. And so often we want to go to battle over things that are not that important. And so I think those things are really, really, really important. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that. I feel like
Yeah.
super vulnerable, and I think people, those examples like that are really helpful on understanding you've been there, you've been in a hard spot with it, and there's
Yeah.
a reason why you believe in it so deeply, because
Yeah.
you can
It
see the
works.
healing, you can see the positive
Yeah.
place that you are.
Well, yeah. And, there was a while, because actually it was when I was starting to do this work is when I went through a divorce. And I thought, how can I be teaching about conflict and going
Mhm.
through a divorce?
Going through, yeah.
But the fact is yes, I can do all of that. Because
Yeah,
it's not about getting divorced. It's about, again, what are you doing with it? Are you destroying
exactly.
people along the way? Because my kids will even say today is they see why, and they think it was a good idea. At the time they didn't, but they
Mm.
see that it didn't take them long to see how that made sense for us. So yeah, and a lot of people are divorced. So I like to throw that in there as possibility, because a lot of people get divorced and they say, I'm gonna make life miserable for that other person. And it's so sad, because if you have children, they're the ones that suffer. And nobody ever wins when you take that attitude. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So,
love that.
yeah. Yeah.
I my head goes to where, like, a health professional, you hear some people say if the health professional doesn't look the part, then it's hard to listen to them. And I'm like, I kind of feel the opposite. I feel like sometimes when we're going through it, it goes to your point of what am I doing with that challenge right now?
Right.
And that
Right.
we can be the best teacher because we are empathetic and dealing with it as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I get how hard it is. It's not easy. Same thing with drinking. It's like I find it's, I have tremendous respect for anyone that's drinking alcohol, and I don't have a judgment about it. I just know if you want to stop, it's not easy. Same with smoking. I've never been a smoker, but boy, I have a lot of empathy for people that smoke, because I know addiction is really, really hard to deal with. So yeah.
mhm, mhm. And that
Yeah.
that can come across in food, it can come across in, just any area,
Shopping.
technology, even our phones.
Oh, the phone is the worst.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Let's
Mine's
be
been beeping.
honest.
Mine's been going off on light the whole time we've been talking here, and I'm not looking at it. I should have turned it off.
I'm not paying attention to you.
I just see the light. I was like, why didn't I? Here, I'm going to just turn it upside down there.
Yeah,
Not like I was going to answer a text while I'm talking to you.
I know. We're just so conditioned to it, right? It's so like,
I
no.
guess we get dopamine charge from those
Mm.
follows and those messages somehow. So,
Yes, and I've heard wonderful talks on that too, and just the,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you think of our little people who have them and get it. The one that I heard was he was comparing it. It was probably Simon Sinek, I think, who was
Yeah.
comparing this to the same as an alcoholic gets from alcohol,
Yeah.
gamblers get from gambling. It's the dopamine hits that we
Yeah.
get from our technology,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's scary because we have age limits on everything, but we don't have age limits on technology.
Yeah.
That,
Right.
and
Well,
even, yeah.
Steve Jobs changed the world, and a lot of it's really great in some ways, but a lot of it's not so great. And I think that's where we are right now. I think we kind of got to rethink how we use this stuff, because it is consuming all of us. I mean, I see people walking around looking down at their phone, and it's like, you could walk into something.
Yeah.
It's like, and it's
Even
not good
worse.
for your neck. Another health
No.
thing. It's like if you're looking down, there's all this weight on the back of your neck. That's not good for you either. So
there's a term for that too, tech neck,
tech
that
neck,
our
yeah.
chiropractor always talks about. Yes,
Yeah.
that this is terrible to be in any, length of time.
Yeah.
So
It is. And
I'm making you digress here. I feel like I gotta rein it back in, because
okay, we're getting close to time, aren't we? Are we? I don't even know how much time we
I
have.
think I'm already over on yours, and then I have kids. Gotta
Oh,
go grab. I could talk
yeah.
to you for hours. Is the
Yeah.
problem,
This is
or not
fun.
the problem? I
Yeah.
feel like one of my last things I want to wrap up with you is just kind of this. You have been there, done that with children, with divorce, with, for our
Mhm.
listeners, even with health. Like, if you could wrap your arms around our people and send them out with kind of your biggest piece of advice, or the thing that you wish people would hear as you speak, what would that be?
Oh gosh, I think when you find yourself pushing yourself or pushing others, stop. Because pushing is always a way.
Hmm.
Pushing is always a way. And I think we forget that. We push our children because we think they'll be better. We push ourselves because we think we'll achieve more. We push other people, but that really closes people off. And my next Newsweek article is actually on that subject, which is, if I was considering working with a coach a few years ago, and he asked me if I had the cure to cancer, if wouldn't I want to scream that from the rooftops? And I said, no. And he kind of looked surprised, and he said, why not? And I said, because I know if I try to push something or infringe something or say this is it, nobody will listen to me.
Hmm.
And so so if you find yourself pushing, just stop. Think about your intent. Think about starting to ask questions, thinking about your center. There's a whole lot of things. I mean, but I think the most important thing is, when you're pushing, just stop, because you're creating more resistance.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
And is this in your book too? Because I feel like I hear the stop, and then I hear the amazingness behind pushing. I'm loving where you just went with that.
Yeah.
But then after the stop, the tangible, and I guess you were trying to say that too, but like, then it's just introspective, as far as like, what is my intention? What's my,
Well,
is
and see, and that kind of goes back to the model, and I wish it were as simple as to say, okay, just do this. Oops.
yes,
Um,
never that.
but
Half an hour.
I'll just share the 5 keys. So the first thing is to recognize when you're pushing, and a little bit of push is okay. That's where innovation comes from. And some people can take more push than others, but just be conscious of that. Now, there's 4 other choices. There's 4 choices, and you don't have to do these in any order. Turn your statements into questions, acknowledgments, or both. Because when we are pushing, we usually have a statement about that. You're not going fast enough. I'm not good enough. This never works. We have these statements we say, and those statements keep us stuck where we are. Turn those into questions, acknowledgments, or both. In my book, I have a whole page that lists all kinds of options with that. That's one thing. Okay, so feel that push, stop, think spiral. One thing you can do is change your statements into questions, acknowledgments, or both. Again, another thing, you're doing this push, stop. Another thing you can do is get centered. And we haven't talked a lot about that, but basically get to breathe. Your center is about 1.5 inches below your hara, your navel. That's your hara. Again, I've got all kinds of practices, and there's a free download actually on my resource page. That's a centering practice for while you're driving. And I take people through how do you sit in your car? How do you put your seatbelt over your hara and breathe while you're driving? So I have it's acoustical guitar in the background. And so wherever you go out, and then when you come back, so there's a starting your day and ending your day debrief. And there's a zillion different ways of doing that. But so you feel tension, and when you stop, pay attention. Are you making statements? Change the statements to questions, acknowledgements, or both. Number 2, center. And so that I encourage people to have a daily practice with that. So again, I said there's 5 things. So recognize the tension, ask questions, acknowledge, center. Another one is declare your intention. And your intention is, what is it that I want that does not impact, that's not conditional on another person? That is, I think, the most overlooked thing in conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 4th one is support. Is so you feel that tension, you stop, think spiral, ask questions, get centered, declare your intention. And where's your support? And support looks all kinds of ways. It may be listening to your podcast. It may be journaling gratitude. It may be eating right. It may be having a trusted friend or advisor. You can talk through things that aren't going to judge what you're saying. So there's all kinds of different ways of supporting yourself. I do a lot of inspirational reading. All those things support me. And so that's the thing. But the one thing I want your listeners to think about is when you feel like you're pushing, stop. And, you have a lot of people out in the world that are saying, you got to keep on pushing.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. It's futile. So stop it.
No pain, no gain. I can't stand that kind of stuff.
No, and
It's
it's not true.
right.
And even when you're trying to stop a bad habit, you're pushing against yourself, and you got to find a different way to do that. And so think about, how can you do that without resistance? And I think, not to keep dwelling on drinking, but I think every time I want to think about having a drink, I think of, no, I want to have a naked mind. That's the name of that book. And so it allows me to go to somewhere else that I want to be. So it doesn't feel like pushing. It feels like a different choice. So
right. It's not you're not scaring yourself out of it. You are fighting for something instead, fighting for something that is attractive to you.
Yeah. Making a different choice.
Yeah.
Is what it is. So that's
yeah,
totally
I think my listeners will smile that you keep bringing up drinking, because even in the name of my book, I call myself the wine loving dietitian, accountability and coaching from your wine loving dietitian. And I bring that type of stuff up a lot because I think when we can disclose we're not perfect, right? Like, to your point of, we're not shouting a message at the time. It's just, we're all working through things in life. And definitely that glass of wine in the evening is one of my things that I always do with my group. I'm like, I need to stop doing this. So I'm going to read this book.
But if you want to, that's the difference. And, and I don't say I've stopped. I say right now, I haven't. And because I may have wine. I'm not going to beat myself up if I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just aware of, and I have, it's not like I've been this perfect person with that, but every time I do it the next day, I think and I should say the middle of the night, it's like I realize I don't feel well. I don't sleep well when I do that. And why do I keep doing it? So it just reinforces what I want to do. A naked mind.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, you brought so much goodness to the table today. Thank you so much.
This was fun, Lindsay.
So fun. Do you have a title to your podcast coming out?
Well, it's going to be the Spiral Impact Podcast.
Okay.
I don't know. I've dealt with that. And then someone said, why don't you just use Spiral Impact? It's intriguing. So that's what I'm going to do.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
well, keep us posted.
Honestly,
yeah.
What is the name of your podcast?
It's Direction, Not Perfection.
That's right.
That is actually the name of my book too, is Direction, Not Perfection, Accountability and Coaching from Your Wine Loving Dietitian. Right. So the books do just lend nicely into, it's your brand, right? That's who you are out.
Right.
And
exactly. Yeah. So if I decided to call it something else, I thought about calling it Power with Grace, but then I thought it might be kind of confusing.
No, so funny that you just said that because that's what I thought that's what made me ask you about your title because the
Oh,
power with grace, especially in my community, because I have a lot of women
mhm,
and 30s to 70s type, and I
uh-huh.
just feel like most of us feel like when we're powerful, it's not with grace. It's because we're like having to put a
But
hammer down or we're coming
you,
across bratty instead of stern, like you're
you're
painting
u-
this whole different picture around it.
you're using force instead of power
Yeah,
when you do that. Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
Mhm. Yep.
So just those words, power with grace, is like, I think all of us
Yeah.
need to write that down somewhere that we are
Yeah.
allowed to hold power and allowed to
Yeah.
be that person and not back down, but we can do it
Yeah.
gracefully
Yeah.
and walk away proud of ourselves at the end of the
Ex-
day.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
yeah, I don't want to go. I
Oh, I
don't,
don't.
but I have to. My kids are gonna be
How old are
standing.
you? How old are your children?
They're 9 and 12.
Oh, those are
We're
great ages. Those are great
super fun.
ages.
So fun,
Yeah.
yes. But
Yeah.
also old enough to give me a hard time if I'm late.
Oh, I know. I used to carpool when my kids were that age, and I always took the kids in the morning, and then my friend would pick them up because I was working and
Yeah.
she was not, and she was so late. I mean, I think my kids to this day think of her and think, oh, late. No,
Late. Not a good association
no.
because we're if you're early, you're on time type of a family. So I
Uh-huh.
definitely feel like late feels
Yeah, well,
awful.
hey, well then let's get off here and we'll talk again.
No,
I want to be
seriously,
a
thank you so much for coming. You've been
Yeah.
wonderful.
Oh, this was fun, Lindsay. Thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you.
Yeah. So have a good evening.
Sorry.